Hello everyone, my name is Shonda and welcome to my channel Under the Needle. So, I frequently take classes at my local quilt shop. Well, so when I say frequently, oh god, my cord is in the way. I'm so sorry. I'm sorry. Um, so when I say frequently, I mean, so pre-pandemic, of course, I had found a local quilt shop and I started taking a few classes there. And basically it was, we make a quilt, right? They give us a pattern and they give us instruction and we meet for a few hours and we sew and then we go home and then we come back, and each class has 2 to 3 sessions depending on what we're doing. Um, so of course the pandemic kind of stopped all that from happening, but now that things are opening back up, I've taken a couple of classes. So one of the ones that I took was on free motion quilting, just to get some practice. And basically they taught us some rudimentary patterns. Well, not rudimentary. They taught us some different patterns that we can use on our quilts. And then they also taught us, they gave us these swatches that we could use to practice. Great, right? Well, then the next class that I took was a specific pattern, and the name of the pattern was Bloomer. And this class interested me for a couple of reasons. One, because I like the pattern, and two, because the person who wrote the pattern was actually going to be the instructor. And I thought that was kind of cool to actually learn a pattern or construct a pattern with the person who actually wrote it, right? That's kind of cool, right? So that's what I did. So the quilt that I made, and it was kind of because it was actually published in a magazine. I think it was in the February or February, March version of Quick and Easy Quilts. And the pattern designer was Abby Dollinger. So the quilt that we put together, the name of the pattern was called Bloomer. Now, I made some creative decisions in this quilt, and then I also made some mistakes when I made this quilt. The creative decision that I made was in the way that I chose to lay out the middle section. I think she did it a little bit different in the written pattern. But the mistake that I made was that this here was supposed to be chevroned. And in order to chevron it, of course, you had to sew. You had to do your stitch and flip in 2 different directions so that your stuff would chevron. I didn't do that. And also I made a mistake in that I put the pieces on wrong, because we were supposed to go from this blue, this is our first, and then this pink is our last. And then you can see here, we start with the blue and we end with the pink floral, and I messed that up over here. I sewed it on wrong. Actually, I think I sewed these pieces, these 4 patches on wrong. So the only way to get it to match, I would have had to like flip the 4 patches, and there was no way that was happening. So, so this is what I got. Now, the quilt in the magazine was for this, smaller wall hanging, but in the class, she did teach us a larger version of it, how to do a larger version of it. This one is made with charm squares, and she taught a larger version with layer cakes. Since I really had no business starting a new project, because I have like 15 of them in progress in various stages, I really couldn't justify a large project, but I can always justify a small one. I'm lying because I'm lying because I'm about to start another project. I'll talk about that another day, but I'm 1000% about to start another project. And if you follow Gudrun Erla of GE Designs, then you know exactly what project that I'm talking about. And if you don't, I'll talk about it in a later video because I'm super excited about it, but I digress. So because I had done some free motion quilting and got a little bit more practice with that, and then I have this little wall hanging here, which is the perfect size quilt in order to practice my free motion. So I am going to use this quilt to practice my free motion. So I thought it might be a good idea to kind of let you guys know some of the tools that I use as a new beginner free motion quilter, some of the things that are out there, some of that I use, some that I don't use, some that I'm thinking about using maybe, and just kind of wanted to take some time to go over that. So the first thing that people will tell you is that, your machine setup, and there are certain limitations that we might have based upon our machine setups. If you're fortunate enough to be able to have a drop down, have your sewing machine into a drop down table, that's great because you have a nice flat surface. That's awesome. I do have one of those now, but I did not always. I just got that set up sometime last year. But before that, I didn't have that. But it does help if you have, some type of nice wide place to sew. So if you have an extended arm on your sewing machine and you can pop that on, but the more space you have, the better. The more, the larger your quilting area, the better, right? So that's great. The second thing we need to do is have a slippery surface, right? So there are a few things that people do. One, there's a silicone spray. I have never used the spray, but there's a silicone spray that you can actually spray onto your sewing machine surface and like buff it in or wipe it or something, and it creates this like slick surface on your machine that just kind of stays there. I'm not sure how long it lasts, but it's a thing that exists. I had just bought like a brand new sewing machine, so the idea of spraying something on it, no matter how safe they say it's supposed to be, did not appeal to me whatsoever. Like, you want me to what? I just bought it. It's brand new and you spray? No. So then there was all this talk about a Supreme slider. And at the time they were pretty expensive. They're still expensive, although they are not as expensive as they used to be. They're expensive. So what I used to start out was an oven liner, and I went on Amazon and they had this like black oven liner that was super slippery, and I was able to tape it down onto my surface. I used some painter's tape. You can cut it to fit. I had to cut a hole out in the middle, of course, to make room for my needle and for my feed dogs. So because I wanted to cut out space for the feed dogs in case I choose to use my walking foot, because if I'm doing walking foot quilting, I still want that slippery surface. So if you're only doing free motion, then you don't need that. But I knew that I was going to be doing walking foot quilting, a lot of it. So I cut out a square large enough to fit my foot and my feed dogs, and used blue painter's tape and just taped it down. And that was what I used until I was able to get a Supreme slider. Now, for me, there was no functional difference between the Supreme slider and the oven liner. So if you cannot afford a Supreme slider, do not worry about it, like at all, because that oven liner is relatively inexpensive. And I believe at the time it came in a 2-pack. So you got like 2, and it was like not a lot of money, like, I don't know, maybe $10. I don't remember. I will look it up on Amazon and I will drop the link in the description below. So I did finally get a Supreme slider. So back in the day when Blueprint, so Craftsy, then Blueprint, now back to Craftsy, they used to have 50% off sales. 50% off whatever you wanted. So I took that opportunity and got myself a king size Supreme slider. I have abused it quite a bit. You can see areas where like I made a mistake and I tore it. You probably can't see the needle marks, but I've accidentally sewn through it, all kinds of shenanigans, but it's still holding up. So although there is no difference in function between the Supreme slider and the oven liner, what I do like about the Supreme slider is that when I'm done with it, I literally can just take it off my machine, roll it up, and put it back in its case. So with the oven liner, it's a little bit more cumbersome. It's not as easy, but it can be, so if you can, get you one of these, I'm sure there are tubes like this that are for other things. If you can get you a tube, some kind of tube or some kind of system that will allow you to store it. But just for like Supreme first world convenience here. The Supreme slider is better. It does win the vote for first world convenience, but it does not win the vote for actually being more slippery, because it's not. I found them the same. So those are the only things that I know about. Those are the only products that I'm aware of, or the most recognizable ones that I'm aware of. The silicone spray, the oven liner, and the Supreme slider. So another thing that I always use gloves. Okay, so one moment, guys. I'm just spreading the Supreme slider out so I can show you the gloves, right? Because I want to show you how the quilt moves on gloves. So I've tried lots of different gloves. I have not tried any hoops yet, okay? And I don't think that I'm going to, at least not yet, and I'll tell you why. I am a lazy quilter, and I'm a lazy free motion quilter. So I don't do a lot of detail work. I don't do a lot of stitching in a small space. I kind of go for a larger overall design. So those hoops, and because I'm doing a larger overall design, I don't have to have as much immediate control over what I'm doing. So what I mean is, in general, they teach you that when you're free motion quilting, you kind of put your hands like this on your quilt, and you only quilt within that space in your hand, and you don't go outside of it. So when you need to move, you have to move your hands. But when you're doing a larger all over design, that's not a lot of space. If I'm doing like large hoops or swirls, this is not a large space for me to sew in. And so I often will go outside of that area. So, and I can do that without having to move or reposition. I can kind of just go outside that area and just kind of slide one hand and then slide another hand to kind of get back in position. And that's been working for me. With the hoops, there's a few different hoops that I've seen. One of them is, I believe, Sharon Schomburg designed it, and they're red. They're red, but it's a full circle. And Martelli has a set also. Martelli has a set also that are black, and they're full circles. So that means anytime you want to move that hoop off of your quilt, you have to break thread. And I hate breaking thread. Hate it. Gypsy Quilter makes one that has a cutout in it. It has an open space so that you can take it on and off your quilt. So if I was to use one, that might be the one that I would try if I wanted to try it. That's probably the one that I would go for, just because it does allow me to remove it without having to break thread. So, but the other two, I could see how they could be useful when you're doing that smaller, dense type of quilting, because you're doing a lot of stitching in a very small space, and you're not going to need to move the quilt as much. You feel me? Like if you're, I'm trying to come up with a visual example and I can't. So let's just take this little circle here. Now the hoops are, of course, they're bigger. They're usually 8 or 9 inches. But, say this was your hoop, and you're doing this, if you're doing an all over swirl design, you're going to get 2 swirls in before you're going to need to move and reposition. But if you were doing super detail work like tiny pebbles, you would be doing a lot of stitching before you ever needed to move the hoop. So, and you would also need a lot more control. And you're also holding your hands in one position for a long time. So I could see how having a hoop, if you're doing dense quilting, could potentially be useful, especially if you are someone who gets hand fatigue. And I do. I get hand fatigue. So that's one of the reasons why I stopped crocheting. The first fabric craft that I ever I taught myself how to crochet, but I had to stop doing it because you know, the detail work, the hands, it was too much. Somebody's outside my house, probably dropping off my son. So if you hear beeping in the background, that's what that is. Let me turn the volume off on my phone because the cameras are probably going to chime when he comes to the door. That's going to be more noise. So let's turn that off. Apologies. This is real life here. So, not really interested in trying the hoop thing right now. To me, it seems like it's better if you're doing small, dense quilting. And right now I have absolutely zero interest in doing any type of detail work or any type of dense quilting. So for me, gloves are enough because I can give myself more room. I can make my hands like this or like, you know, and give myself more room. And repositioning is a lot easier. And it's a lot easier for me to move whichever way I want to go around the quilt if I'm not bound by a hoop, and I can just move my hands. So for large all over patterns, for me, the hoops would not be extremely helpful. To me, it seems like they would be more helpful when you're doing more smaller, more detailed, more dense quilting. I go with gloves, and I'm going to show you a few different ones. So I've got my quilt on the Supreme slider here so it can move a little bit. I'm going to tilt my camera down so my face is going to be out of frame a little bit, but I want you to see. Sorry about that. I had to hit pause. Go talk to my kid. So, okay. Let me come in frame a tiny bit. It's always like I don't know I have stains on my shirt until I get on camera. Oh, that's just lint. Oops. That's just lint. So, okay. So, gloves. The cheapest glove is this. This is your garden variety dollar store gardening glove. So the whole point is to reduce the amount of effort that you have to put in, to reduce the amount of fatigue that your hands are going to go through, right? And that your back is going to go through. Because the more you have to push and pull and press down, the more you have to do that, the more friction that you have to deal with, the more tired you get in your arms, your back, your shoulders. So, and in your hands if you have hand issues like I do. So, this is your garden variety dollar store glove. Now, I didn't purchase these. They came in one of my boxes. First thing about them, that's annoying, okay? The sound. Second thing, they're not exactly made to fit. You know, the fingertips. By the way, I cut my fingertips off all my gloves because it helps to reduce sweating. I get hot. My hands get hot and sweaty when I'm quilting. So cutting off the fingertips gives me air, right? But I really don't like that we don't have like a tight fit here. But what do you expect for $1, right? So I'm just going to lay my hand here, and I'm not going to put any pressure. I'm just going to use the pressure from my hand to move the quilt. So just the pressure from my hand, it does move the quilt, and it moves it quite easily. No problem. But again, not very fitted, noisy, and they're hot. So your hands sweat. I'm sure you could buy better quality gardening gloves, but by the time you spend money on better quality gardening gloves, you can just get some quilting gloves. Everyone's favorite, Machingers. These run about $10, $12 on Amazon. These, all of the grippy is on the fingertips only. So there's no grippy here. So if you're doing this, you're using your fingertips only to move the quilt. which is why I don't like them, because I'm having to stay in this position because I find that I just, I don't know. I don't know. I can't cut the fingertips off because of the grip is in the fingertips. So I just have this full glove on, 2 full gloves on for hours, right? And it's just too much for my hands. And your phone, you know, they do work for your phone. So even though you can't cut your fingertips off, you don't have to worry about not being able to, you know, swipe your phone or read your phone fingerprint. So they're fine. But for me, I just don't like wearing a full glove, and I can't cut the tips off because the whole point of wearing them is the tips. But they are super effective, and they move the quilt very well without much pressure. These here, these are Fons and Porter. This is a smaller quilt, so it's going to move a little easier than a larger one that's going to have more drag. But in general, all the gloves we're looking at, even the Dollar Tree ones, these have the least grip. These little nubbies here are not very grippy. So when I'm moving this little quilt around on the Supreme slider, it seems to move fine, but in real life, you're going to have to put a little bit more effort if you want this to go, because sometimes, you know, depending on where we are, we might be okay, but sometimes when you're moving this quilt or using, if you just move, it is possible to move your hand on the top of this quilt without any pressure, without using, I mean, I'm not saying this the right way. It is possible for your hand to move back and forth across the quilt without the quilt actually moving. So this is just the pressure of my hand right now, and I'm going across the quilt, and my hand is moving across the quilt, but the quilt is not moving. Now, if I put a little bit of pressure, we don't have any anymore. But I can still feel my hand sliding. Even though the quilt is moving, I can feel my hand sliding. And that happens in real life too. So the Fons and Porter are really not my favorite. They're what I used for a long time because I hated these. So I used these for a long time, even though they weren't very efficient and they weren't the most effective. Then in another quilt box, I got these little puppies here. These are by the Gypsy Quilter. I think these run $10 or $12 as well. They look like the Fons and Porter. However, the Fons and Porter seem to fit my fingers a tiny bit better, but it's fine. These have grippies on the back. I'm not sure what you use the grippies on the back of the glove for, but they do have grippies on the back in case you need them. And I did find that the fabric that they're made of isn't quite as good as the Fons and Porter, because you just get a lot of, like, if you can see, like, kind of, you really can't see, but when you cut it, the edges like immediately kind of get a little raggedy. But I haven't had any unraveling, but also I haven't had to wash them either. So there's that. But they are more grippy. So when I put my hand down on the quilt, I don't have my hand, with just the weight of my hand is not sliding. So when I was using the Fons and Porter glove with just the weight of my hand was sliding along with, my hand was sliding on top of the quilt. Whereas this case, the quilt is moving, but my hand is staying in the same place. So these work actually pretty well. They really work pretty well. I'll probably end up cutting the rest of the tips off. The last pair of gloves that I'm going to show you are the most expensive ones. These are Marcia Baraldi quilting gloves. Okay, so basically it's like a circle with a loop for your thumb and some Velcro. So, and a loop for your middle finger. So you slide your middle finger in, you put this around here, and you put this around here. And so you got kind of a custom fit. And this requires absolutely zero pressure. I will say that if you're free motion quilting with these gloves, you need absolutely zero pressure to go anywhere you want. It's going to let you do whatever you want. Your hand, you're not going to have to worry about your hand slipping at all. But they get hot. This is some type of neoprene. All of this is some type of neoprene, like what they use for ankle braces and elbow braces, to kind of, so neoprene is designed, like athletes wear it to kind of keep the heat in on a wound or on a sprain. And so I found that they get super hot. Like, they are my favorite to quilt with because I have such control. I have such control over the quilt when I use these gloves. But I find that my hands start to sweat. I'm not quite sure what to do about that. I might try to find like a lightweight glove and cut the fingertips off. I don't even know. I don't know. Like, I like the results that I get and the control that I have when I use these. But I just find that after, 20, 30 minutes, my hands start to sweat. And then I have to like take it off to give them a breather. So I find that I tend to right now be rotating between these two, depending what I'm doing. So since this is such a tiny quilt, it's like a 24-inch wall hanging, I'm probably going to use these gloves. And I'm probably going to use this as an opportunity to do kind of detail work that I wouldn't normally do. And it's because of this. Like, if you are on a large quilt and you start doing this small quilt pattern, you're kind of married to it to some degree, right? Because you can't just, you can, it's your quilt, you can do whatever you want. But, if you want some kind of continuous, homogeneous look, you can't kind of start off, with this, small meander, and you're doing really small stitches, and then all of a sudden you're like, I don't like doing that, so I just want to start making them bigger. Like, you can't really do that. And now you're kind of stuck doing this small design on this large quilt, and maybe you're not wanting to do it. Because I had it happen to me. I was I started, a design, and I was doing the free motion quilting, and then I was like, you know what? This is going to take way too long, and I'm not that good at it. So I'm still a beginner. So not only is it going to take a long time, but it's going to, it's not going to look the best. It's like, I'm no Angela Walters over here. I'm not, I am just a beginner. So, I think I might actually take my time on this and do it in pieces and not try to rush to get the whole thing done, and maybe try out some, something that I wouldn't normally do, a smaller type stitch pattern is what I'm thinking. So I'm not sure yet, but I might be leaning that way. We shall see. Again, I'm lazy, so I might change my mind and do some type of larger all over design. But it's a 24-inch wall hanging, so it's not going to be too large. I don't want it to be too, too big or whatever. There's also an issue of thread color. I don't know what thread color I want to use because my colors are all over the place in this. So we'll see. But I digress. Really what I wanted to do was talk about some of the tools that I have heard about for free motion quilting, tools that I use, things that work for me and things that don't. So what works for me? A Supreme slider. What works for me? Oven liner. What I haven't tried, silicone spray to actually spray on the machine. What I have not used or tried, the hoops. I have not tried any of the hoops, and I went over why. Maybe I'll try one in the future when I decide to do more detail work. Gloves, dollar store gardening gloves, work, but they're hot, they're noisy, and they don't have a good fit on your hands. Fons and Porter gloves will work in a pinch, but you're going to have to put more effort into the movement of your quilt because the grip is not as great. If I could get these gloves with this grip, I would be great. I would love that. These by the Gypsy Quilter, they're good too. Another thing I didn't like about these is the words on the back. Because you can see on this one how they're coming off. I don't really like that. I feel like if you're going to put words on here, then you should put words on here that are going to stay and not words that are going to like peel off. That's just a personal opinion. So honestly, I would have rather they not put this on here. And again, I also don't know how these are going to hold up in washing. You can kind of see on this glove here. Let's see if you can see. That's from me cutting it, the fraying. That's just from me cutting it. And it's starting to get kind of runs in it. Like how you get runs in your stocking. It's so hard to see. It's starting to like get runs in it. You know what happens to knit sometimes. So I feel like this is a better quality fabric, and like this is a better quality knit, and this has better quality grips. So give me this glove with this grips, with this, this grip, and I'd be a happy camper. So, but they do work. And of course, our Marcia Baraldi gloves, they work. Incredible control. But for me, they get hot. So that's it for me today. This video ended up being way longer than I anticipated it being. So my apologies for that and my long-windedness. But thanks for tuning in, and I will see you next video. Have a great day.